Darius Coleman walked up to the counter, his first-class ticket in hand. The agent, Brad, didn't even look up. "Economy's over there," he said dismissively, his eyes already shifting to the next passenger. The words hit Darius like a slap, but he didn't flinch. He simply nodded, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. He could feel the weight of the room shift, every empty seat in the lounge, every glance from the staff, the subtle murmur of others' conversations, it all felt like a warning. The small injustice, the cold dismissal, was just the beginning. Brad smiled at the next white passenger. "Right this way, sir. Enjoy your upgrade." Darius watched it all with icy calm, his mind calculating each move. He wasn't angry. He was far from it. He was planning. Within minutes, Brad's world would unravel, but right now, he had no idea what he just set in motion. Hello friends, if you new here then don't forget to hit subscribe button, and if you like then hit the like button also, and don't forget to tell me in the comments where you from watching this video. What happens next will shock you. Hit like and subscribe to real life stories new to witness the silent power of a man who refused to be overlooked. Darius Coleman's first-class ticket felt heavier than it should have as he held it in his hand. The terminal lounge was pristine, modern, a cold monument to corporate luxury. But today, it felt alien. It was just after 4 p.m., and the soft hum of the airport's machinery, the distant clink of glass, and the low murmur of waiting passengers blended into the background, unnoticed by everyone around him. But Darius wasn't looking at any of that. His eyes were locked onto the gate agent standing behind the counter, a young man named Brad, who hadn't even acknowledged his presence. Brad's bored gaze scanned the crowd, glancing past Darius without a second thought. The moment seemed to stretch, as if the world around him had faded into a slow-motion blur. Darius stood tall, his posture immaculate in a tailored dark suit, crisp and precise. He didn't fidget, didn't tap his foot or glance around. His gaze was steady, unwavering. He wasn't angry, but he wasn't calm either. There was something simmering beneath the surface, something that had been building for years, a quiet tension. Brad finally looked up, only for a second, as if checking a box. He took the ticket from Darius's hand without meeting his eyes. There was a moment's hesitation, a flicker of recognition perhaps, but it was gone as quickly as it had come. Brad barely glanced at the name on the ticket before muttering, "Economy's over there." It wasn't the words that cut. It wasn't even the fact that Brad had failed to notice the man standing before him. No, it was the tone. The casual dismissal. It was as if Darius's very presence didn't warrant the same attention that was so easily given to the passengers before him. Brad's voice was calm, almost too calm, as if he was used to giving such commands. But what he didn't know was that in that moment, Darius was taking mental notes. He was calculating, assessing the exact nature of this slight. This wasn't just about one small act of ignorance. This was about the countless other passengers who had come and gone, greeted with smiles, treated as if they belonged, and not once questioned. This wasn't just a miscommunication. This was something deeper. The rage that began to build in Darius was not of the wild, fiery kind. It wasn't the kind that screams for justice or burns for vengeance. No, it was much colder than that. It was the rage of someone who had spent years in corporate rooms, watched board members who looked like him being ignored, dismissed, or sidelined. It was the rage of someone who had seen how easily society's assumptions could dictate someone's worth, all based on something as superficial as the color of their skin. Darius wasn't just a businessman in this moment. He was a man who had learned the hard way that he would never be afforded the luxury of being just another person. He could feel the eyes of the room on him as Brad motioned toward the lounge, barely sparing a second thought to the man standing before him. Darius wasn't sure if it was the white passengers who had just walked by, laughing casually as they breezed past, or if it was the obvious discomfort in the air. Whatever it was, he had already decided. He knew that, like many before him, he could simply let the moment slide. He could walk away, go sit in the lounge, sip the champagne offered to first-class passengers, and pretend this had never happened. But what good would that do? For too long, moments like this, seemingly small, seemingly insignificant, had been brushed off, swept under the rug. But this time, Darius wasn't going to let it go. Not this time. Brad had made a fatal mistake, not in the words he said, but in the very act of assuming Darius didn't belong. It wasn't just an error, it was a confirmation of what Darius had known all along, that the world, in its systemic bias, would always place him in a position where he had to prove himself over and over again. That this airport lounge, this first-class space, was a microcosm of society, where people like him weren't welcome unless they fit a very specific mold. And Brad, he had just pushed him to the edge. Now, Darius had a decision to make. Darius didn't flinch. Instead, he stood there, unwavering, watching Brad move on to the next passenger with the same careless ease. But Darius didn't leave. He didn't walk away. He did the one thing that Brad never saw coming, he pulled out his phone. His fingers moved quickly, efficiently, tapping out a short, cold message, "Same issue. Proceed as discussed." He didn't need to say more. In that simple act of sending a text, Darius had set something in motion, something that no one, especially Brad, could have foreseen. The truth was, Darius had known how to navigate these situations his entire life. He had learned to read the room, to study the power dynamics, and to wait for the right moment to strike. His upbringing had taught him that silence could be louder than words, that calculated patience could bring down even the most impenetrable walls. And this moment, this seemingly insignificant slight, was no different. The thing that Brad didn't understand, that so many people didn't understand, was that power wasn't always about shouting the loudest or making the biggest scene. No, true power was often quiet. It was about recognizing when you were underestimated, when the system had already decided who you were, and then it was about quietly dismantling it, piece by piece. As Brad continued to greet other passengers, Darius remained still, almost invisible, his mind racing with possibilities. He didn't have to do anything dramatic. He didn't need to make a scene. Brad had already dug his own grave. All Darius needed was time and the right people in place. He could already hear the hum of the airport terminal, but it sounded different now, more ominous, as if the air itself had changed. And deep down, Darius knew that this moment, small as it seemed, was the turning point. Brad had just opened the door to a much larger storm. As the seconds stretched, Darius felt the cool calm of a man who had already won. The first phase of the plan was complete. All he had to do now was wait. And as the next passenger, a young man in a wrinkled hoodie, breezed past the counter, greeted warmly by Brad with a friendly, "Enjoy your upgrade," Darius felt the simmering anger inside him coalesce into something much more dangerous. It wasn't just about Brad anymore. It was about everyone like him. It was about the system that allowed people like Brad to thrive, to perpetuate the bias without consequence. For the first time in a long while, Darius smiled. It wasn't a smile of satisfaction, not yet. It was a smile of recognition. He had been here before, many times, and he knew exactly how to win. The quiet hum of the airport terminal continued around Darius Coleman as he stood still by the pillar, observing the unfolding chaos in slow motion. Brad, the young gate agent, carried on with his job, greeting passengers, laughing with them, never once acknowledging Darius's existence. The first ripple of Darius's plan began to spread, unnoticed by the very man who had ignited it. But Darius was patient. He always had been. He knew the moment wouldn't come with a bang. It wasn't meant to be a spectacle. No, it was going to be quiet, calculated, and efficient. And Brad, completely unaware, was playing right into his hands. The lounge behind the glass doors continued to fill with passengers, most of them white. Their interactions with Brad were smooth and carefree. They moved through the space with ease, as if they belonged there without question. But with each exchange, with each warm greeting given to yet another person who seemed to have been granted access based on nothing but the color of their skin, Darius's resolve hardened. This wasn't just about one isolated incident. Darius had seen it before, the dismissiveness, the subtle racism disguised as professionalism. He had seen it in boardrooms, in airports, on the streets. He had been the other too many times to count. And in that moment, watching Brad laugh with the next passenger, he realized it wasn't just about being denied a seat. It was about the systemic nature of the dismissal, the assumption that someone like him didn't belong. Darius's lips twitched into a smile, but it wasn't one of humor. It was the kind of smile a man wears when he knows something others don't, a smile that signals the beginning of something far bigger than anyone, least of all Brad, could imagine. The phone vibrated in his pocket, the buzz barely noticeable amidst the muted noise of the terminal. Darius didn't need to check it. He already knew. The message had been sent. The wheels were in motion. He glanced up at the digital display hanging above the lounge, listing the various departing flights. A faint sense of satisfaction swelled inside him. This was it. In the background, he could hear Brad continuing to banter with the passengers, his voice louder now, his tone more relaxed. Another person was waved through. Another person was treated like a VIP without question. And yet Darius, standing there, dressed as finely as any of them, holding a ticket that promised him the same luxury, was still standing at the gate, invisible. This wasn't just a casual oversight. It was a deeply ingrained bias, one that Brad had likely never thought twice about. But it was about to cost him more than he could imagine. Across the terminal, Marcus Trent, Jamal Pierce, and Lionel Brooks were already in position. Darius's quiet network had been activated. What was about to unfold, Brad would never see coming. It wasn't an immediate attack, nor was it an overt gesture. It was going to be surgical, the kind of maneuver that could change everything without anyone realizing until it was too late. Darius's phone buzzed again, this time with a short message that read, "Everything in motion. Ready when you are." The calmness of the text was almost eerie. It was a confirmation, a simple acknowledgement that the plan was unfolding exactly as it should. He stood there, still, taking in the scene. He watched Brad laugh again as another group of passengers strolled through the lounge doors, seemingly without a care in the world. Darius's mind worked methodically, like a machine ticking away, processing every detail, every interaction. Darius shifted slightly, his gaze moving to the door where Brad stood, continuing his work. He was still oblivious, too comfortable in his assumption that no one would challenge him. That was about to change. Darius wasn't alone. This wasn't a battle that one man could win alone. But with his network in place, with people who understood the game just as well as he did, the system that had once protected people like Brad was already beginning to crack. And in that moment, as Darius observed, he felt the tension in the air shift. Something was happening. It wasn't just about Brad anymore. It was about the entire structure, the structure that had allowed people like him to be ignored, dismissed, and overlooked. It was about to be dismantled, piece by piece, with no one even realizing it until it was far too late. The thought of it made Darius smile again. This wasn't about anger. It wasn't about revenge. It was about something much deeper, a reckoning that had been a long time coming. Inside the lounge, the atmosphere shifted as well. As passengers continued to flow in and out, the staff began to sense an undercurrent of change. Brad's interactions with the customers were still the same, casual and friendly, but there was something in the air now, a subtle tension. It was as if the people around him, the other staff members, were beginning to notice something wasn't quite right. And then the signal came. Lionel, Marcus, and Jamal moved into position, quietly, professionally. No one noticed them. And that was the point. The moment they had been waiting for had arrived. It was time. At that very moment, Brad glanced down at his phone, a frown crossing his face as he read the message that had just arrived. His expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, but the panic inside him was palpable. He couldn't quite place it. The message didn't make sense, but he felt the weight of it. He turned back to the counter, glancing over at the staff as they continued to work, oblivious to the storm that was quietly brewing in the background. But that calmness wouldn't last. Not for long. Within minutes, Lionel was at his side. He didn't speak at first, just placed a small envelope on the counter in front of Brad. The sight of it caused Brad's stomach to tighten. The envelope was sealed, official-looking, something he wasn't accustomed to seeing. "Brad," Lionel's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. "This is for you." Without a word, Lionel turned and walked away. Brad was left standing there, a growing sense of unease washing over him. He took the envelope, torn between curiosity and confusion. He tore it open hastily, his eyes skimmed the document, and with each word, his face grew paler. His hands trembled slightly as he read. Internal notice. An official summons from Orion Air's Compliance Division. Immediate suspension of duties. Report to Room C-12. Mandatory review. He blinked, rereading the words as if they were a joke. But there was no punchline. The more he read, the more his chest tightened. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some misunderstanding he could talk his way out of. It was real. The weight of the document was undeniable. Brad stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. He glanced around the terminal, hoping for some kind of explanation. But the passengers, the staff, everyone, continued as if nothing had changed. The quiet, muted buzz of the terminal was almost deafening in its calmness. Then Lionel reappeared, flanked by two men, both wearing navy blue blazers with the unmistakable insignia of Orion's Compliance Division. Brad's stomach dropped. His heart raced. One of the men, with a calm but firm voice, addressed him, "Brad, you're relieved of your duties. Please follow us." As Brad was escorted out of the terminal, his face pale with confusion and anger, the once lively atmosphere of the lounge seemed to hold its breath. The staff continued to move about, serving drinks and assisting passengers, but a new tension had settled into the air. It wasn't just about Brad anymore. It was about the system that had allowed people like him to flourish. That system was starting to crumble, and with every passing minute, the ripple effect of Darius's action spread further than anyone could have anticipated. The cold reality of his dismissal had barely set in when Brad was led down the quiet hallways of the terminal. His body moved mechanically, following the compliance officers who flanked him, their steps purposeful and quick. As they passed by other staff members, the whispers began. The once bullish gate agent who had commanded respect without question now seemed like a shell of the man he once was. The humiliation was already palpable. Brad's mind raced, desperately trying to find an explanation. This couldn't be happening. He had been untouchable, or so he thought. He was a fixture at Orion Air, a face that passengers recognized, a part of the smooth, efficient operation that ran the terminal. But now, all of that was slipping away. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he couldn't bring himself to check it. The sudden awareness of his vulnerability hit him like a freight train. The internal memo. The suspension. The Compliance Division's cold, calculated actions. They were no longer protecting him. He was alone. As the sound of Brad's retreating footsteps faded, Darius remained in his seat, still watching everything unfold. His expression was calm, his mind laser-focused on the next steps. What had just happened was only the beginning. He had planned every moment, every move, to ensure that the message would be clear, not just to Brad, but to everyone watching. The lounge, once filled with a hum of idle chatter, was now heavy with whispers. The staff members who had been silent observers of the entire scene now exchanged furtive glances. Some were uncertain, others curious, but none of them were the same as they had been an hour ago. They had witnessed something significant, something that went beyond the dismissal of a single employee. Darius had ignited a fire. And now it was spreading. His quiet, calculated movements had made it clear that change was inevitable. He wasn't just taking down Brad. He was taking down the entire system that had allowed people like Brad to think they could get away with treating others as less than. The subtle racism. The dismissive attitudes. It had all been exposed. But the real work had only just begun. Darius's gaze shifted to his phone. Another message had arrived: everything is proceeding as planned. Moving to the next phase. It was a confirmation. It was time for the corporate leadership to feel the weight of their silence, their complicity in upholding an unjust system. Inside the corporate offices of Orion Air, chaos was beginning to unfold. Thomas Quinn, the regional manager, sat at his desk, stunned by the contents of the email he had just received. The report had hit hard. Brad's file had been flagged, his actions captured on video for all to see. But that wasn't the most shocking part. As Thomas scrolled down through the report, his stomach turned when he saw the name Charles Denton repeatedly. Charles Denton, the former lounge supervisor, had been the one to cover up Brad's earlier offenses. He had been the one to ignore the complaints, the one who had brushed off the concerns of passengers and staff alike. Now Charles was gone. The compliance division had quietly removed him from his position without any fanfare. But his legacy remained. His protection of Brad had allowed the culture of bias to continue unchecked. Thomas felt a cold sweat form on his forehead as he realized the magnitude of what Darius had done. This wasn't just about firing one rogue employee. It was about exposing a larger, insidious problem that had been buried under layers of bureaucracy and complacency. The ripple effect was spreading, and Darius was at the center of it all. But Darius had made one thing clear: this wasn't personal. This wasn't about Brad. It was about fixing the system. And if that meant dismantling the entire structure that had allowed this kind of behavior to thrive, then so be it. Meanwhile, Brad was being escorted to the HR department, his face flushed with embarrassment. He had been through the motions of corporate punishment before, but this felt different. This wasn't a simple reprimand. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. This was the beginning of the end. Inside the HR office, Brad was handed a sealed envelope. He opened it slowly, his hands shaking. It was the termination letter. His immediate suspension had been confirmed. But it wasn't just that. The letter stated that he would be placed under review for his actions and that a full investigation was underway. His future at Orion Air was uncertain, and the walls were closing in fast. Brad's heart raced as he tried to process everything. He had spent years building a reputation, cultivating a position of authority, only to have it all crumble in a matter of minutes. This wasn't just about losing his job. This was about losing everything. His colleagues, once his allies, were now avoiding his gaze, their whispers louder than ever. His career, his status, gone. And then it hit him. It wasn't just the termination. It was the fact that he had been exposed. His actions. His complacency. His behavior. Everything was now public knowledge. There was no going back. He had become a symbol, a cautionary tale for anyone who thought they could get away with discrimination and bias. Back in the lounge, Darius stood up, his movement deliberate, purposeful. The mission was complete. He could feel the weight of the moment, the satisfaction of knowing that his plan had unfolded exactly as he had intended. As he made his way to the door, his phone buzzed once more, this time with an update. The next phase was already underway. Marcus, Jamal, and Lionel were moving swiftly, making sure that every loose end was tied up. The staff at Orion Air would undergo mandatory sensitivity training. The corporate policies would be overhauled. And all complaints, past and present, would be re-examined. No one would be allowed to hide behind their position or their privilege anymore. The system that had once protected Brad and others like him was gone. Darius had made sure of that. He stepped out of the lounge and into the bustling terminal, the sounds of the airport filling his ears. But his mind was already several steps ahead. The change wasn't just for Orion Air. It was for every company that had allowed this kind of behavior to fester unchecked. The ripples of what he had started would spread far beyond this airport. Darius knew that. As he walked through the terminal, his expression remained unreadable. But inside, he felt a sense of triumph. He had done what needed to be done, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. For the first time, the system had been rebalanced, and there was no turning back. Darius's phone buzzed again, this time with a simple message: the storm is over. The system's not broken anymore. It's been rebuilt. Darius Coleman's quiet revolution isn't just about one man's triumph over personal bias. It's about the ripple effect that can reshape entire systems. By exposing the flaws in a system that protected privilege and discrimination, he didn't just change one man's career, he changed the very culture within Orion Air and beyond. This story is a powerful reminder that every small act of courage, every stand against injustice, can lead to monumental change. It might be easy to feel powerless, to think that one person can't make a difference. But Darius proved otherwise. His actions remind us that change begins with standing firm, with challenging what's wrong, and pushing for something better. But here's the question: how many other systems are we living in where the same biases thrive, unnoticed, unchecked? It's not just about this one victory. It's about what happens next. Stay with us as we dive deeper into stories that challenge the status quo and reshape the world we live in. What will you do to start your own ripple? Make sure to like, subscribe, and share to keep the conversation going. Real life stories, new is just getting started.